What if one quiet family didn't just get rich in Canada, but helped build it from the ground up? Their influence reaches into the breweries in your fridge, the banks on every corner, the major sports teams you cheer for, and the elite universities that shape the country's future. Their name is rarely in the spotlight, but their power has quietly passed from one generation to the next. This is not just wealth. This is old money, the kind that moves behind closed doors and shapes entire institutions. Most Canadians have no idea how far their reach goes, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. This is the family that basically owns Canada. Desmarais family. If there's one family in Canada that pulls strings without ever stepping into the spotlight, it's the Desmarais. They don't chase headlines, yet their influence runs straight through banks, boardrooms, Parliament Hill, and even international diplomacy. When people talk about real old money and long-term control, this is the blueprint. The story of the Desmarais family started with a bus line. In 1951, a young and ambitious Paul Desmarais Sr. took over a failing local company called Sudbury Bus Lines in northern Ontario. It looked like a small-time move, but Paul turned it into a regional transit success story. He didn't just keep the business alive, he grew it fast. Between 1965 and 1968, Paul went on a buying spree. He took control of the Trans-Canada Corporation Fund, snapping up assets like La Presse, Imperial Life, and major radio stations. But in 1968, he made the move that changed everything. He acquired Power Corporation of Canada, a quiet holding company that would soon become his empire. Paul became chairman and CEO and never looked back. In the 1970s and 1980s, Power Corporation exploded in size. Under Paul's leadership, it took control of giants like Great-West Life, IGM Financial, and London Life. Then launched Power Financial Corporation in 1984. These were not just acquisitions. They were beachheads into every corner of Canadian finance: insurance, wealth management, investments, pensions, and more. The Desmarais family was building an empire that touched millions of lives without most people even realizing it. But the real power move came through politics. Paul Desmarais built personal relationships with three prime ministers: Pierre Trudeau, Brian Mulroney, and Paul Martin. Then it got even closer. His son, André Desmarais, married Jean Chrétien's daughter, putting the family directly inside the Liberal Party's inner circle. People whispered, but Paul didn't need the spotlight. His influence was already baked into policy, capital, and diplomacy. By the time Paul Sr. passed in 2013, Power Corp had grown from a $165 million company into a financial machine with more than $2.7 billion in assets, delivering over 16% annual returns. And Paul gave back just as strategically. He funded top buildings at Université de Montréal, University of Ottawa, and the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts. He also helped build Canada-China trade relations by co-founding the Canada-China Business Council. After 2013, his sons Paul Jr. and André took over. Today, the next generation, Paul Desmarais III and Olivier Desmarais, lead new ventures like Sagard Holdings and Power Sustainable, taking the empire global. Now, Power Corporation oversees $477 billion in assets. And while critics question their behind-the-scenes political ties, the Desmarais family keeps doing what they do best: long-term strategy, generational control, and deep national influence. Their name might not trend online, but in Canada's real corridors of power, the Desmarais legacy is already locked in. David Thomson family. If old money had a throne in Canada, the Thomson family would be sitting on it with a billion-dollar crown. The Thomsons played the long game. They started small, took brutal losses, made bold comebacks, and then quietly took over the information economy. Today, they are worth an estimated $68.6 billion. Their story began with one broke man and one tiny radio station. Back in 1931, Roy Thomson was just trying to sell radios door-to-door in northern Ontario. It wasn't going well until he had a brilliant realization. If people had something to listen to, they'd buy the radios. So he spent $200 to buy a small radio station in North Bay. That move didn't just boost radio sales, it handed him the keys to the broadcast kingdom. Roy became obsessed with controlling the content people heard and read. In 1934, he bought the Timmins Daily Press, a tiny newspaper that barely made money. But Roy saw value others missed. One paper led to another. By the 1950s, he owned over 100 newspapers in Canada, the US, and the UK. He didn't chase prestige. He chased distribution. He built a printing and broadcasting web that advertisers couldn't ignore. But even empire builders hit walls. By the 1960s, print media started declining, and competitors were rising fast. The empire Roy built began to wobble. His son, Kenneth Thomson, took the reins and made the boldest move in family history. He pivoted to information services, betting that data, not news, would shape the future. It worked. In 2008, the Thomsons merged their company with Reuters, forming Thomson Reuters, a global powerhouse in financial data, journalism, and tech. They didn't just survive the media collapse, they turned it into their launch pad. Now, under David Thomson, the family controls their fortune through Woodbridge Company Limited, with deep investments in media, real estate, and fine art. Quiet, calculated, and deeply embedded in global infrastructure, the Thomson name is not just old money. It is generational dominance. And it all started with $200 and a radio. The McCain family. If you've ever eaten a French fry from a fast food chain or grocery freezer, there is a good chance it came from a company built by 4 Canadian brothers in a tiny New Brunswick town. In 1957, Wallace, Harrison, Robert, and Andrew McCain took their farming roots and transformed them into a global business that changed the frozen food industry forever. Their company? McCain Foods. Their first product? Frozen fries. That one move exploded with potential as convenience food swept across North America. By the early 1960s, McCain Foods was already scaling up. They pushed into Europe, the United Kingdom, and Australia before most Canadian businesses even considered going global. In 1966, they bought Day & Ross, a trucking company that gave them full control over their logistics. Suddenly, McCain could ship anything, anywhere, with speed and control. By 1973, they were running operations in the Netherlands, and their empire was only getting bigger. But success did not come without turbulence. In the 1990s, a painful and public family feud erupted between Wallace and Harrison over control of the company. It ended in 1994 with Wallace stepping down. He didn't quit, though. The very next year, he turned around and bought Maple Leaf Foods, proving he was not done building giants. McCain Foods, however, remained under family control and kept growing. What began as a rural potato operation evolved into the largest frozen fry manufacturer on the planet. By 2023, McCain products were sold in over 160 countries, and the company was earning close to 14 billion Canadian dollars in annual revenue. That is the kind of scale only old money dynasties dream of. Despite the business split, the family found healing. In the early 2000s, Wallace visited a sick and bedridden Harrison. The two brothers reconciled, ending over a decade of estrangement. The moment wasn't just personal, it reconnected a family that had built an empire from nothing. The McCain name is also written across Canada through philanthropy. Since 1993, the McCain Foundation has supported education, rural communities, healthcare, and the arts. In 2011, Wallace and Margaret McCain donated $5 million to expand the Wallace McCain Institute for Entrepreneurship at the University of New Brunswick. Margaret McCain's contributions are equally massive. She gave $10 million to Mount St. Vincent University for early childhood education. She also chairs the Muriel McQueen Ferguson Foundation, which fights family violence, and has played a major role in mental health funding through the TAMH McCain Center. Today, the McCain family stands tall as one of Canada's richest and most respected dynasties. They built an empire from potatoes, battled through personal fallout, and reinvested into the country that shaped them. Their story is one of power, pain, purpose, and ultimately, legacy. The Richardson family. When you think of Canadian old money with real grit and stamina, the Richardson family belongs in the spotlight. It all began in 1819 when James Richardson emigrated from Ireland to Kingston, Upper Canada. He started as a tailor, but he learned that customers often paid in grain instead of cash. Instead of walking away from that, he saw opportunity. In 1857, he launched James Richardson and Sons, a small grain trading venture. It was a humble start, but smart. By 1867, he had built a warehouse, a wharf, and purchased his first ship to send grain to the United States. By 1883, his company opened Kingston's first grain elevator and was processing thousands of tons of grain a year. In the 1920s, under James Richardson's grandson, James Armstrong Richardson Sr., the company expanded into aviation and built Western Canada Airways. But then came a crush. The loss of transcontinental air routes in 1937 devastated him, and he died just 2 years later. It was one of the deepest setbacks in their history. But his widow, Muriel Richardson, stepped up. She led the company through World War II, kept operations stable, and even expanded into oil, gas, real estate, and financial services after the war. By 1966, when Armstrong's son, James Richardson Jr., took over, the family's portfolio had moved from millions to over $100 million. That was major old money for the time. Yet, they did not stop. They diversified. They modernized. They did not chase quick gains. They built institutions. The Richardson legacy lives on in iconic landmarks and cultural institutions. Their headquarters, the towering Richardson Building in Winnipeg, remains a city icon. The family donated to Queen's University and helped shape the aviation industry. Winnipeg's International Airport carries the Richardson name. Their handprints are on farms, boardrooms, airports, and charity halls. In 2017, they won the Manitoba Philanthropy Award. Today, in 2024, James Richardson and Sons Limited is worth more than $10 billion. It remains a diversified powerhouse in agriculture, energy, transportation, wealth management, and real estate. All of this was built with daring early moves, resilience in the face of disaster, and savvy leadership across generations. The Richardsons teach us something powerful. Old money is not always loud. It often lasts because it builds with care, learns from losses, and holds firm through storms. That is the quiet strength of a family that truly owns its legacy. The Molson family. Let's rewind to 1786, when a bold 22-year-old Englishman named John Molson decided the best way to beat the bitter Montreal winters was beer. He set up a brewery along the St. Lawrence River, and just like that, the Molson name was born. Today, that little brewery is North America's oldest still in operation, and the second oldest company in Canada. But John wasn't just about hops and barley. He built steamships, launched Canada's first railway, helped found Montreal's first public hospital, and even presided over the Bank of Montreal. By the early 1800s, if you lived in Montreal and touched anything, money, medicine, or a mug of beer, it probably had Molson fingerprints on it. Fast forward to the mid-1800s. The Molson brothers, William and John Jr., launched Molson's Bank, which issued its own currency until it merged with the Bank of Montreal in 1925. By 1900, the family was already one of Canada's wealthiest, with assets in brewing, transport, and finance. During Prohibition in the U.S., Molson doubled down on the Canadian market and later expanded exports post-Prohibition, driving up revenue. In 1957, they made a bold move that embedded the family into Canadian identity. They bought the Montreal Canadiens hockey team and the Montreal Forum. It wasn't just business, it aligned the Molson name with national pride. In the 1960s and 70s, the Canadiens dominated the NHL. Each Stanley Cup win boosted the Molson brand and beer sales. The family's visibility soared. Then came 2005. Molson merged with Coors, creating Molson Coors, a global titan valued over $6 billion. By 2024, it generated over $1.1 billion annually. The Molson family's private holdings are estimated between $2 to $3 billion, earned through beer, real estate, sports, and philanthropy. Since 1958, the Molson Foundation has supported arts, education, and health. From McGill University to Université de Montréal, they've given millions to meaningful causes. The Molson name isn't just about beer, it's about shaping a nation. The Weston family. The Weston family story began in 1882 when George Weston, a young baker's apprentice in Toronto, bought a bread delivery route. Within a few years, he launched his own bakery, gradually growing from local bread delivery to full-scale production. By 1896, he opened the Model Bakery, which quickly gained a reputation for efficiency and innovation. By 1911, his products were reaching more than 500 stores, a rare scale for that era. After George's death in 1924, his son, W. Garfield Weston, took over and aggressively expanded the company. Under his leadership, George Weston Limited went public and grew into a multinational food processing and distribution business. Garfield used profits from bakery operations to invest in biscuit and bread companies both in Canada and overseas, laying the groundwork for the Weston Group's international outlook. A major turning point came in the early 1970s when W. Galen Weston, Garfield's son, returned from managing family assets in Ireland. He took over a struggling Loblaw companies and restructured the entire operation. Galen introduced modern retail design, better product placement, and bold marketing strategies. He turned Loblaw into Canada's largest grocery retailer. Loblaw's innovation in private label branding, such as President's Choice and No Name, set it apart from competitors and made it a household name. In the 1980s, the Westons expanded into luxury retail. Through their holding company, Whittington Investments, they acquired Holt Renfrew in 1986. They followed with major international acquisitions from 2003 onward, including Selfridges in the United Kingdom, Brown Thomas in Ireland, and De Bijenkorf in the Netherlands. These purchases cemented their influence in high-end retail across multiple countries. In 2021, the family sold Selfridges for an estimated £4 billion, demonstrating their strategic approach to asset growth and divestment. Despite stepping back from some luxury assets, they remain one of the most influential families in Canadian consumer retail. What started as a humble bakery eventually became a global retail empire through calculated expansion, innovative branding, and bold restructuring. Their growth reflects deep business insight, passed through generations. The Irving family. In the year 1881, James Durgavel J.D. Irving bought a modest sawmill in Bouctouche, New Brunswick. That simple move sparked the birth of what would become one of Canada's most powerful family-run empires. J.D. Irving Limited didn't stop at lumber. It branched out quickly into grist milling, farming, and even retail. By the early 20th century, J.D. had already planted the seeds of a vertically integrated business model before the term even existed. Fast forward to the year 1924, and his son, K.C. Irving, took the reins. K.C. wasn't just ambitious, he was relentless. He launched Primrose Oil, which later became Irving Oil, and began acquiring more land, refineries, shipping operations, pulp and paper mills, and even newspapers. By the early 1930s, the Irvings controlled nearly every piece of their supply chain, from cutting the trees, transporting the logs, refining the oil, printing the news, and delivering it all with their own trucks. In the 1970s through the 90s, K.C. fully integrated his empire. Every branch served the others. Forestry fed the paper mills supported the newspapers, the ships and trucks transported oil and lumber. Nothing left the Irving web. This structure turned the company into an economic fortress in Atlantic Canada. After K.C.'s death in 1992, the empire split among his sons. James K. Irving took charge of J.D. Irving Limited, which included shipbuilding, transport, and forestry. Arthur Irving got Irving Oil, covering refining, distribution, and fuel retail. John E. Irving took Ocean Capital, covering construction and real estate. Yet even divided, their combined fortune stayed in the billions. Beyond business, the Irvings became major landowners, managing over 1 million acres across New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Maine. Since 1957, they have planted more than 1 billion trees, carefully shaping their public image as stewards of the land. But perhaps their most controversial asset was media. By owning nearly every English-language newspaper in New Brunswick through Brunswick News, they shaped public opinion and policy. Critics claimed the family wielded too much control over land, jobs, news, and even politics. Their influence, some said, was closer to an oligarchy than a family business. From one sawmill to a billion-dollar web of industry, media, and power, the Irving family has not just built a fortune, they've built a province around their name. The Morgan family. When you talk about the real builders of Canada's old money legacy, the Morgan family deserves a front-row seat. They didn't make their fortune digging for gold or drilling for oil. They built it the classy way, through retail, elegance, and a vision for culture that still shapes Canada today. It all started in 1845, when a young Scottish immigrant named Henry Morgan opened a small dry goods store in Montreal. At the time, it was just another business. But Henry had a bigger plan. He turned that one store into Canada's first true department store. He gave people something new: high-quality products, great service, and a shopping experience that made people feel important. By the early 1900s, Morgan's wasn't just a store. It was a symbol of status. Everyone in Montreal knew the name. But retail was only the beginning. The Morgan family kept growing their influence. But what really set them apart was what they did for Canadian art and culture. F. Cleveland Morgan, Henry's great-nephew, took the family name to another level. He was more than a businessman. He was a cultural force. For nearly 50 years, he served as the first curator of decorative arts at the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts. He donated thousands of pieces to the museum and built one of the best collections of decorative art in the country. And then there's Le Sabot, the Morgan family estate built in 1912. It's not just a home, it's a statement. It remains one of the finest examples of Canadian arts and crafts architecture. Every piece of that home shows the Morgan family's attention to quality, design, and timeless taste. Even after their department stores were sold to the Hudson's Bay Company in 1960, the Morgan legacy never faded. Their name still echoes through museums, galleries, and cultural foundations. They were not just shop owners, they were tastemakers, curators, and legacy builders. In a world full of noise, the Morgans made their mark by moving quietly and building things that lasted. They didn't just sell products, they shaped what Canada looks like, what it values, and how it remembers. That's old money power, and the Morgans mastered it. The Bronfman family. When you talk about Canadian old money, few names carry the international weight of the Bronfman family. Their empire began in the early 1990s when Samuel Bronfman, a Jewish immigrant from Eastern Europe, turned a modest liquor business into a continental powerhouse. While others feared the consequences of America's prohibition, Samuel saw opportunity. He legally produced alcohol in Canada and moved it across the border, fueling a fortune that would make his family one of the richest in North America. In 1928, Samuel acquired Seagram, a respected distillery, and from there, things exploded. Over the next few decades, Seagram became the largest liquor company in the world, selling brands like Crown Royal, Chivas Regal, and later investing in Absolut and Martell. The Bronfmans weren't just selling spirits, they were building a financial dynasty rooted in smart expansion and bold moves. By the late 20th century, under Samuel's son, Edgar Bronfman Sr., and later his grandson, Edgar Bronfman Jr., the family took their empire beyond booze. They expanded Seagram into entertainment and media, acquiring stakes in Universal Studios, MCA, Polygram, and more. Though controversial deals in the early 2000s led to Seagram's breakup and a loss of direct control, the family pivoted fast. They continued growing their wealth through real estate, private equity, and venture capital. Their investment firm, Claridge Inc., remains a major force in Canadian finance. Over the decades, Forbes has repeatedly listed Bronfman family members as billionaires, with assets reaching into the billions across generations. But it's not just about money. The Bronfmans have funded McGill University, Concordia, and the Canadian Centre for Architecture. Edgar Sr. also led the World Jewish Congress, helping reclaim Jewish property stolen during the Holocaust. Their influence has shaped culture, politics, and philanthropy on a global scale. Today, the Bronfman legacy is still thriving. Wealth, power, and cultural reach all passed down with quiet confidence. This is old money that never stopped evolving. The Saputo family. In the year 1954, Giuseppe Saputo and his teenage son Lino arrived in Montreal from Sicily with one goal: to turn a family tradition of cheesemaking into a sustainable living. They had just 500 Canadian dollars, a used bicycle, and no factory, only a commitment to hard work. They began producing cheese by hand in their home and delivering it personally to Montreal's growing Italian community. Just 3 years later, in 1957, they opened their first production facility in the Saint-Michel neighborhood of Montreal. The timing couldn't have been better. The popularity of pizza in North America was surging, and demand for mozzarella exploded. What started as a local operation soon became a citywide brand. By 1969, Lino Saputo had become chairman of the company. Over the next 3 decades, he steered the business with a clear focus: controlled growth and smart acquisitions. In 1997, Saputo Inc. went public. This move marked a turning point. It gave them access to capital and triggered rapid international expansion. From the early 2000s through the 2020s, Saputo Inc. executed a string of aggressive acquisitions. In 2001, they purchased Dairy World Foods, expanding into Western Canada. In 2008, they bought Nielsen Dairy, solidifying their position in Ontario. In 2012, they acquired Morningstar Foods in the United States for $1,450 million Canadian dollars, opening up the American market. International growth followed, with significant moves into Argentina, Australia, and the United Kingdom. Today, Saputo Inc. ranks among the top 10 dairy processors globally. As of 2025, they report annual revenues of about 19.06 billion Canadian dollars and employ over 19,400 people. Their products are sold in more than 60 countries across 6 continents. That is old money on a grand scale. But they did not forget their roots or their responsibility. In 1979, Lino and his wife Mirella created the foundation Mirella and Lino Saputo to support sick children, people with disabilities, and immigrant families. Between 2006 and 2008, the family contributed $7,500,000 to help build Montreal's Saputo Stadium, home to CF Montreal. From 2013 onward, their Saputo Legacy program invested over $3,700,000 into health and sports infrastructure across Canada and abroad, encouraging healthier lifestyles for underprivileged communities. In 2016, the family received the EY Family Business Award of Excellence, honoring both their entrepreneurial achievements and social contributions. This family didn't just build a company, they shaped a Canadian success story. What do you think about these families? Feel free to share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Want more videos like this? Then subscribe to the channel for more eye-opening stories. Thank you so much for staying with us till the end. See you in the next video.